The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the quiet suburban street. Lila walked slowly, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, feeling the crisp breeze brush against her cheeks. It was the kind of day that made her heart ache, with a quiet longing, sweet, tender, and just a little sad. Life, she thought, had a way of feeling both comforting and lonely at the same time. She had lived in this neighborhood for years, and though she knew many faces, most interactions were fleeting. Neighbors exchanged polite smiles, children raced past her with laughter, and the hum of daily life carried on around her. But Leela often felt like an observer rather than a participant. She longed for connection, for moments that reminded her that life could surprise her in small, beautiful ways. Her thoughts wandered to Ethan, her neighbor who lived just a few houses down. She hadn't known him for long, only a year, but there was something quietly magnetic about him. He moved with a calm grace, always ready with a kind word or a small, thoughtful gesture. Though they had only exchanged brief conversations over mailboxes and garden fences, Leela found herself thinking of him more than she expected. Today, however, there was a reason she was walking toward his house with a small sense of purpose. She had noticed Ethan had seemed distant, quieter than usual over the past week. The light in his eyes, usually bright and welcoming, had dimmed slightly, and she couldn't help but worry. Leela had a soft heart, one that instinctively reached toward people who seemed to carry invisible burdens. She didn't know exactly what was wrong, but she hoped her presence might bring even a tiny spark of comfort. As she approached his front porch, she noticed the garden was still and calm. Ethan was sitting in his favorite chair, a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the fading horizon. His brow was furrowed in thought, and Lila felt an unexpected pang in her chest. How could one person carry so much unspoken weight and yet appear so composed on the surface? "Hey, Ethan," she called softly, her voice breaking the quiet like a gentle ripple across a still pond. He looked up, surprised, and then managed a small smile. "Lila. Hi. I didn't expect anyone today." "I thought I'd come by," she said, stepping closer. "You've seemed a little off lately, and I wanted to see if you were okay. Maybe cheer you up a bit." Ethan chuckled quietly, but there was a wistful edge to it. "I appreciate that," he said. "Honestly, it's been a rough week, but I'm okay." Lila's gaze softened. She knew that okay often meant the opposite. There was a quiet vulnerability in him, something that called to her protective instincts. She set her bag down gently and offered a warm smile, the kind she reserved for moments when words weren't enough. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The air was filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of a neighbor mowing their lawn. Lila wondered what it would take to lift the weight from Ethan's shoulders. Sometimes, she thought, it only took one unexpected moment. One gesture that showed someone they weren't alone, to remind them that life could still be gentle and kind. Then, just as she was about to speak, Ethan reached toward the small table beside him and picked up a neatly wrapped package. Lila's eyes widened slightly. I meant to give this to you," he said, his voice soft and tentative. "I saw it and thought, maybe you'd like it." Lila's curiosity sparked instantly. The package wasn't large, but there was something undeniably personal about it. The wrapping was careful, the ribbon tied in a delicate bow, and a small hand-drawn tag bore her name in Ethan's neat handwriting. For a moment, Lila hesitated, unsure how to respond. She hadn't expected a gift, and yet in that simple act, she felt an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. Reminder that small gestures could carry enormous meaning. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the box, feeling the texture of the paper beneath her palms. It was more than just a present. It was a symbol that someone had noticed her, thought of her, and cared enough to do something kind without being asked. Ethan's eyes met hers, and there was a flicker of something unspoken in invitation, a silent hope that perhaps this small moment could be the beginning of something more. And in that quiet, golden hour, Lila realized that even in a life that sometimes felt ordinary, there were moments that could surprise her heart, make it flutter. and remind her that joy often arrived when it was least expected. She didn't know what was inside the package yet, but she knew deep down that this simple gesture would change the course of the afternoon, and perhaps the course of her life. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, painting Ethan's living room in soft golds and ambers. Lila sat across from him at the small kitchen table, the gift still resting unopened beside her. The air between them was calm, but it carried a quiet anticipation neither had yet put into words. It had been weeks since that small, unexpected encounter in the garden. Life had continued its routine, but something had shifted subtly between them. Every time Leela walked past his house, she found herself glancing at the window, hoping for even the briefest glimpse of him. And every time Ethan noticed her from his porch, a gentle warmth spread through him, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had yet dared to name. Today, though, felt different. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight caught the dust motes in the air, making the room feel almost enchanted. Perhaps it was the simple fact that Lila had accepted his invitation for coffee, an ordinary gesture that somehow made the heart beat faster. "I still can't believe you came by," Ethan said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, eyes never leaving Lila's. "I didn't expect anyone to notice that I needed a little company." Lila smiled gently, the edges of her lips trembling with unspoken emotion. "I noticed," she admitted. "Sometimes people need a little reminder that they're not alone. And I wanted to be that for you." There was a pause, delicate and lingering, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Then, unexpectedly, a soft sound came from the porch knock, polite but insistent. Both of them turned toward the door. "It's probably the mail," Ethan murmured, rising to answer it. But when he opened the door, he froze for a moment, caught off guard. A small delivery box had been left on the doorstep, addressed to him in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Lila's curiosity surged. "Did you order something?" she asked, leaning forward. Ethan shook his head, his brow furrowed. "Not that I remember. I'll open it, I guess." Together, they lifted the lid of the box. Inside was a simple, elegant notebook, bound in soft leather. Its pages were blank, but the cover bore an inscription that made Leela's heart skip. "For capturing moments that matter." Ethan held it delicately, turning it over in his hands as though it were the most fragile treasure. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "But who would send this?" Lila felt a flutter in her chest. There was something almost magical about the timing, about the way fate seemed to orchestrate small surprises that reminded them of the connection they were slowly building. "Maybe someone wants you to start writing again," she suggested, her voice quiet but warm. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes softened completely. He remembered nights filled with writing. Nights where words had flowed effortlessly from his mind to the page, carrying pieces of his soul. Life had gotten busy, responsibilities had piled up, and somehow that passion had dimmed. But now, holding this small gift, he felt a spark, a gentle reminder that joy could arrive unexpectedly. "And that some connections were worth nurturing, he said, turning the notebook over so she could see it too. This feels like it was meant to happen today." Lila nodded, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the notebook. The contact was fleeting, but it carried a warmth that neither could ignore. "Maybe it's not just about writing," she said softly. "Maybe it's about noticing the moments and the people that matter." For a few minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the world outside fading to a quiet hum. Then, as if encouraged by the serendipity of the moment, Ethan spoke again. "I've been meaning to ask you, would you like to go for a walk later? Just the two of us. It feels like the kind of day that deserves a little adventure." Leela's heart lifted, a mix of excitement and tenderness flooding her chest. "I'd love that," she said, her smile gentle but full of emotion. The rest of the morning passed with an ease that surprised them both. Lila helped Ethan set up his coffee table with small pastries she had brought, and they laughed softly at trivial things, a shared joke about the mailman. A story about Lila's dog chasing a squirrel the previous week. The moments felt ordinary, yet charged with something extraordinary. The sense that life could shift quietly, beautifully, in ways that mattered most when least expected. As the afternoon approached, they stepped outside, Ethan carrying the notebook carefully in his hands. They walked side by side down the quiet street, the golden sunlight casting long shadows at their feet. Every so often, their hands brushed accidentally, and each time, small spark ran through them, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. It wasn't just coincidence that had brought them together today. It wasn't just a gift or a delivery. It was the culmination of shared moments, of noticing, of caring, and of being present in ways that mattered. And in that quiet, sunlit walk, Leela realized that some connections were inevitable, meant to be rekindled when the time was right. The golden hour had faded into a soft, lavender twilight. Lila and Ethan returned from their walk, their steps slower now, reluctant to let the moment end. The quiet of the street wrapped around them like a gentle blanket, the sounds of distant children playing and birds settling for the evening, lending a serene rhythm to their thoughts. Inside Ethan's living room, the soft hum of the heater filled the space. Lila placed the small notebook carefully on the table, but neither of them moved to speak first. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was loaded with something heavier, more delicate unspoken truths that hovered in the air like fragile glass. Beautiful, yet easy to break. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. He glanced at Lila, but instead of words, he offered a tentative smile. It was a smile full of thought, as though he were weighing the courage to say something he had kept inside for too long. Lila noticed it immediately, her heart tightening in a familiar ache she hadn't realized was growing. "Lila," he began, but stopped. The single word lingered in the air, unfinished, and she felt a twinge of anticipation mixed with the faint sting of worry. She nodded gently, encouraging him without needing to speak. "Yes." Ethan took a slow breath, as if trying to gather all the courage he could summon. I've been meaning to tell you something," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Something I've felt for a long time, but I wasn't sure how or if it was the right moment." Leela's own chest tightened. She had sensed there was more between them, a subtle pull that neither had named, a warmth in shared glances and quiet gestures. Yet hearing him say it aloud made the unspoken suddenly tangible, a delicate tension that could tip either way. "I've admired you, Lila," Ethan continued, his eyes searching hers, vulnerable and sincere. "Not in a passing way. I mean, I felt something more than friendship, but I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or complicate things." Lila's lips parted, not in shock, but in a soft exhale of relief and quiet joy. She had felt the same way, in ways she hadn't dared to admit even to herself. Every shared smile, every small moment of connection had planted seeds of longing she had kept carefully guarded. I felt it too," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally speaking the truth. "I just didn't know if you felt the same." For a moment, the room was utterly still, save for the ticking of a nearby clock. Their unspoken feelings, once hidden behind polite smiles and fleeting glances, now hovered between them, real and undeniable. It was a delicate, fragile beauty, the kind that made the heart ache with both hope and hesitation. Ethan's hands twitched slightly, as if he wanted to reach out but feared disturbing the delicate balance. "It's strange," he said softly, "how something so simple, a glance, a laugh, a shared walk, can feel like the entire world has shifted." Lila nodded, her eyes glistening faintly in the soft light. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "And yet, it's hard to let ourselves admit it, isn't it? To face the possibility that what we feel might change everything." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I guess that's what scares me the most. The thought of losing even this our friendship, our connection. I let my feelings show fully." "But," Leela said, taking a tentative step closer, "sometimes the risk is worth it. Sometimes the truth is worth saying even if it's scary. Her voice was gentle, yet carried an earnestness that made Ethan's chest tighten with emotion. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Every fleeting glance, every subtle gesture, was now magnified by the knowledge of what lay beneath the longing, the hesitation, the quiet struggle to balance fear and hope. Finally, Ethan reached for the notebook on the table, flipping it open to a blank page. He placed it gently between them, as if offering not just the paper, but a space to start anew, to write a chapter together neither had dared begin before. "Maybe," he said quietly, "we don't have to rush anything. Maybe we can just take it one moment at a time. But I want you to know, I see you. I notice everything about you, even the little things that might seem invisible to others." Lila's eyes filled with warmth. She reached out, placing her hand near his on the table. The gesture was simple, innocent, yet loaded with emotion. It spoke of trust, of patience, of the beginning of something tender and real. "I see you too, Ethan," she said softly. "And I think maybe we've been waiting for the right moment without even knowing it. Maybe this is it." And in that quiet room, with twilight spilling softly through the windows, two hearts finally acknowledged the feelings they had carried silently for so long. The unspoken truths no longer weighed on them as secrets. Instead, they became the gentle foundation of something new, a connection built on understanding, respect, and the quiet courage to let the heart speak, even when the words felt fragile. As the evening settled around them, there was no rush, no grand gestures, only the shared understanding that sometimes the most profound moments of love and longing were the ones felt quietly, tenderly, and with a patience that allowed emotions to unfold naturally. Lila and Ethan sat there together, hearts aligned in unspoken agreement, knowing that the path ahead would be gentle, deliberate, and filled with the kind of heartfelt intimacy that only comes from truly seeing one another. The rain had started softly in the late afternoon, tapping against the windows in a gentle, rhythmic pattern. Lila sat on the couch, watching the droplets trace paths down the glass. Her thoughts tangled in a mix of anticipation and quiet worry. She had come over to return the notebook Ethan had lent her, filled now with small notes, sketches, and reflections, but more importantly, she had come to confront the feelings that had been quietly building between them. Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the gray sky. The soft rumble of distant thunder mirrored the tension in the room. He hadn't turned to look at her yet, and Lila could sense that something unspoken was pressing against the walls of their conversation. "Waiting to be released, Ethan," she began softly, her voice barely above the rain's whisper. He finally turned, eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was heavy with all the words they hadn't yet said. I didn't expect to feel this way," Ethan confessed suddenly, his voice low but earnest. "I didn't think a friendship could shift like this. And yet, here I am, realizing how much I care, how much I've cared for a long time." Lila's heart swelled. She had felt it too, the slow, steady pull toward him, but hearing him say it aloud made it almost too much to hold in. She reached for her hands, twisting them together nervously, searching for courage. "I've felt the same," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Every time we talk, every time we share a moment, feel it. I've tried to ignore it or tell myself it was just friendship, but it's more, so much more." For a long moment, Ethan simply looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He took a step closer, the room shrinking around them as if the world had narrowed to this single fragile truth. "I've been scared," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Scared that if I admitted it, I'd lose everything. But now, I can't hide it anymore. I want you to know, I've always noticed you. Every laugh, every small gesture, every quiet look you give me, it matters. You matter." Lila's chest tightened, and a small smile broke through the worry that had shadowed her face. "You matter to me too," she said, her voice steady now, stronger with the weight of truth. "More than I ever expected someone could." The rain outside grew heavier, a comforting soundtrack to the storm of emotions inside. Ethan took another step forward until they were only a few feet apart. The distance between them charged with anticipation and unspoken longing. Yet neither moved too fast. Neither rushed. The air itself seemed to demand patience, respect, and the careful unfolding of feelings that had been years in the making. "I think," Ethan said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that sometimes life gives us moments, small, quiet moments, to realize what really matters. And I think this is one of those moments. I can't imagine letting it pass without saying it." Tears pricked Leela's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were the release of all the longing, the restraint, the gentle ache of waiting. "I feel the same," she whispered again, her hand lifting slightly as if to bridge the final distance. "And I don't want to wait anymore. Not for another moment. I want us to try to see where this can go together." Ethan's expression softened, a mix of relief, hope, and quiet joy flooding his features. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand not just as a gesture, but as a promise, a recognition of their shared truth. Lila reached out, placing her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The simple touch carried everything words could not trust: affection, and the acknowledgement of feelings long hidden yet deeply felt. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was a warmth that no rain could dampen. They sat together on the couch, hands clasped, sharing a silence that was now comfortable, safe, and full of possibility. Each glance, each small smile, was a reaffirmation that the truth spoken aloud could heal, connect, and ignite something neither of them had dared to hope for before. "I've been waiting for this," Ethan said finally, his thumb brushing lightly across the back of her hand. "Waiting for the courage to speak, waiting for the right moment. And now, it..." The sun rose slowly the next morning, spilling soft golden light across the quiet street. Lila stood by her front window, watching the way the early rays touched Ethan's garden. It was peaceful, ordinary, yet somehow different. The world felt warmer, more vibrant, because yesterday's turning point had shifted everything between them. She took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling her lungs, and smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, the quiet ache of longing had been replaced with something fuller, gentler hope. She knew that the bond between her and Ethan wasn't built on grand gestures or dramatic events. It was built on small, careful moments of honesty, trust, and mutual care. And that was exactly what made it real as she stepped outside. She saw Ethan tending to his garden, the soft clink of his watering can punctuating the morning calm. When he looked up and caught sight of her, his face broke into a genuine, unguarded smile, the kind that reached his eyes and warmed the heart. Lila felt a flutter of joy, a quiet reassurance that they were on the same page, ready to face life together, hand in hand. "Good morning," Ethan called, his voice carrying across the dew-dappled lawn. "Morning," Lila replied, a light laugh escaping her lips. "It looks like your garden is thriving." "Not as much as I am," he said with a teasing grin. His tone was light, playful, but there was a depth in his gaze that spoke of yesterday's confessions, the quiet truths now acknowledged. They spent the morning together, tending to the small garden and sharing stories over steaming mugs of coffee. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet everything felt extraordinary. Every glance, every shared smile, every gentle exchange layered on the intimacy that had grown between them. It was as if the world had slowed, making room for the connection they had finally allowed themselves to embrace. Later, as the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, Ethan handed Lila the small leather notebook once more. Its pages, now filled with words and sketches, reflected the journey of their emotions, quiet observations, fleeting moments of joy, and the beginnings of a story neither had expected to write. "I think this belongs to both of us now," Ethan said softly. "A little record of what matters and what we've shared." Lila's eyes glistened with gentle tears, not sadness, but the warmth of being seen, of being understood. "I'd like that," she whispered. "A story we build together, one page at a time." They walked side by side down the quiet street later that evening, the sky painted in hues of pink and lavender. The world around them seemed softer, more forgiving, as though it recognized the small miracle of their connection. Each step felt measured, deliberate, yet effortless, a reflection of the ease they had finally found in each other's company at the corner park. They paused by the little bench where they had shared their first real conversation weeks ago. Ethan turned to Lila, taking her hands gently in his. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted honestly, "but I know that whatever comes, I want to face it with you. Every moment, every ordinary day, every unexpected twist, I want to share it with you." Lila's smile was tender, full of gratitude and quiet excitement. "And I want the same. Life is unpredictable, but I think that's part of the beauty. We found something worth holding on to, and I don't want to let it go." They stood together in silence for a few minutes, letting the wind carry away the last remnants of hesitation, letting the warmth of shared understanding fill the space between them. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it didn't need to be. Love, they realized, didn't always announce itself with fireworks. Could arrive gently, persistently, in quiet moments that left a lasting mark as the sun dipped below the horizon. Painting the sky with the softest shades of twilight, Ethan and Lila walked home hand in hand. There was laughter, shared stories, and a comfortable silence that only came from true connection. The neighborhood hummed around them, familiar yet somehow richer, as if it too had acknowledged the subtle miracle of hearts finally finding their place. By the time they reached Lila's doorstep, the stars had begun to appear, delicate points of light in the deepening evening sky. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "Good night, Lila," he said, his voice warm and steady. "And thank you for noticing, for caring, for taking the first step." "Good night, Ethan," she replied softly. "And thank you, too, for speaking your truth, for being brave, and for letting me be part of this." They shared a quiet smile, the kind that held promise without words, and turned to part ways. But even as she watched him walk back down the street, Lila felt an unshakable sense of certainty. Their story wasn't ending. It was beginning anew, full of hope, trust, and the gentle promise of love that was patient, kind, and real. Inside her home, Lila set the notebook on her table. Opening it to the first blank page, she smiled, knowing that the pages ahead would be theirs to fill together, thoughtfully and with hearts fully open. And in that quiet, ordinary evening, life felt extraordinary. The gift of connection, the courage of truth, and the unfolding of love had transformed an ordinary street, an ordinary day into something timeless, a story that would stay with them, not as a fleeting moment, but as a foundation for every day to come. For Lila and Ethan, the unspoken had been spoken, the longing had been met, and the future stretched before them wide open and filled with promise. This concludes the story in a heartfelt, classy, and emotionally satisfying way, keeping all content safe and appropriate for YouTube storytelling.